My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 32 years old. For years, I was the invisible daughter, the reliable bedrock my family stood on but never bothered to look at. The night the entire town gathered to honor me for my community work, my own parents didn't save me a seat at the head table, expecting me to serve appetizers instead. They thought it was my place to stand in the shadows, just like always. What they didn't know was that the most powerful person in the room, Mayor Thompson, was about to walk across the ballroom, pull out a chair just for me, and expose a truth that would change all of our lives forever. If you've ever felt unseen by the very people who should have been your biggest fans, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how this one humiliating night led to the most satisfying moment of my life, hit that like button and subscribe to join our family for more real-life stories about finding your voice when everyone else is trying to silence you. Before that fateful dinner, my life was a quiet routine of giving. I ran the Evergreen Project, a community garden and food pantry that I had built from the ground up in our small town of Maple Creek. It was my passion, my purpose. It started 5 years ago in a neglected public lot with a handful of volunteers and a dream of providing fresh, healthy food for families in need. Now it was a thriving hub with educational programs for kids, a seed library, and a network that supplied 3 local shelters. It didn't make me rich. In fact, my income was barely enough to cover the rent on my tiny one-bedroom apartment and my modest bills, but the fulfillment I got from it was immeasurable. I lived, simply patched my own jeans, and my biggest splurge was buying quality soil for the garden. This quiet, frugal existence stood in stark contrast to the lives of my family. My parents, Frank and Susan, lived in the sprawling 4-bedroom house. I grew up in a house that seemed to demand constant, expensive upkeep. My father, a retired sales manager, believed image was everything. My mother, who had never worked outside the home, had a taste for weekend trips to the city and boutique shopping. Then there was my older brother, Mark. Mark was the golden child, the sun around which my parents' world revolved. He was a real estate developer, slick and successful, with a flashy car, a condo downtown, and a talent for making everything about him. He was the son who made it, while I was the daughter, with the nice little hobby. This dynamic wasn't new. It was the foundation of my entire life. I was the responsible one, the stable one, the one they turned to when they needed something. Not just for emotional support, but for money. It started subtly after I got my first real job out of college before I started the Evergreen Project. "Ellie, honey, could you lend us a couple hundred? The property taxes are just a little higher than we expected this year." Of course I did. I loved them, and I had savings. But lend was a flexible term in their dictionary. It meant give. The money was never paid back, and soon the requests became more frequent and less urgent. I remember one particularly painful instance about 2 years ago. I had been diligently saving for months to replace my ancient rattling car. I'd finally scraped together about $3,000, my new car fund, which I kept in a separate savings account. One Tuesday, my mother called in a panic. "Eleanor, your father and I have an opportunity. We just can't pass up a last-minute cruise to the Caribbean 70% off, but we have to book it by Friday." I was happy for them, genuinely. "That sounds amazing, Mom." Then came the inevitable ask. "The only thing is, we're a little short. We just need about $2,000. You know, we'll pay you back as soon as your father's pension check comes in." My heart sank. I knew what that meant. "Mom, that's my car fund," I explained gently. "I've been saving for so long, and my car is barely running." The silence on the other end was cold. Well, she finally said, her voice dripping with disappointment, "I just thought you'd be happy for us. It's not like you go anywhere that requires a fancy car." Mark would never hesitate. He understands the importance of family enjoying life. The manipulation was suffocating. I was being selfish for wanting basic, reliable transportation. Mark, who had just bought a brand new BMW, was the generous one. I gave them the money. I had to take the bus for 2 weeks a month later when my car finally died for good. They sent me a postcard from Bermuda. They never mentioned the money again. Mark was the master of a different kind of taking. He never asked for money directly. He was too proud for that. Instead, he took my time, my energy, and my connections. When he was trying to get a zoning variance for a new condo project, he expected me to leverage the goodwill I'd built with the city council through my nonprofit work. "Just put in a good word for me, Elle," he'd say casually. "These council members love you. It's the least you can do." I did it feeling a knot of guilt in my stomach, because saying no to Mark was tantamount to treason in my family. The project was approved, and he made a fortune. My thank you was a text message with a smiley face emoji. My college graduation should have been a celebration of my achievement. I was the first in our immediate family to get a degree. I'd worked 2 jobs to get through it with minimal debt. But at my graduation party held in my parents' backyard, my father made a toast. I stood there beaming, waiting for his proud words. Instead, he raised his glass and said, "To the future." And speaking of the future, I want everyone to know that Mark has just closed his first big real estate deal, a $200,000 property. Let's hear it for him. The guests dutifully applauded as my brother took a bow. My graduation became a networking event for him. My achievement was merely the occasion. I was the family's welcome mat there to be stepped on to serve a purpose, but never to be the destination. I was the wallet that was always open, the favor that was always granted, the quiet support system that made their comfortable lives possible. I accepted it because it was the only way I knew how to receive what felt like love from them. I convinced myself that being useful was a form of being cherished. I had no idea that my biggest contribution to the community was about to become the stage for my family's greatest act of disrespect. An act so public and so cruel that it would finally force me to stop being their mat and start standing on my own 2 feet. The status quo of my life, a delicate balance of quiet resentment and dutiful giving, was shattered by a single, official-looking envelope that arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was from the mayor's office. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside, on thick, watermarked paper, was a letter that made my breath catch in my throat. It was an invitation. The town of Maple Creek was hosting its annual Founders' Day dinner, a major event that celebrated the town's history and its most dedicated citizens. And this year, the town council and the mayor's office had unanimously voted to present me with the Spirit of Maple Creek Award for my work with the Evergreen Project. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. They were honoring me after years of feeling like my work was just a little hobby. To have it recognized in such a public and significant way was overwhelming. The letter stated there would be a reception, a dinner, and a ceremony where Mayor Thompson himself would present the award. They were reserving a head table for me and my immediate family. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. I imagined my parents' faces beaming with pride. I pictured Mark shaking my hand, a genuine look of respect in his eyes. This, I thought, would be the moment everything changed. They would finally see me. They would finally understand that what I did mattered. My hopeful delusion lasted exactly as long as my first phone call. I called my mother, my voice giddy with excitement. "Mom, you are not going to believe this. I'm getting the Spirit of Maple Creek Award at the Founders' Day dinner." There was a beat of silence on the line. "Oh," she said, her tone flat. "That's nice, dear. Nice." My world had just tilted on its axis, and her response was nice. She quickly pivoted. "Is it a formal event? I'll need a new dress. And your father will need a new tie? Will Mark be getting an award, too? His new development has really revitalized that whole downtown block." The air went out of my lungs. In the span of 30 seconds, she had made my honor about her wardrobe, my father's accessories, and my brother's achievements. There was no "Congratulations, honey, no, we're so proud of you," just a series of logistical and competitive concerns. I ended the call feeling foolish and deflated. My call to Mark went even worse. After I told him the news, he actually laughed. "Wow, Elle, they're really giving out awards for playing in the dirt now, huh? Good for you." He paused, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Hey, you know who's going to be there? The entire town council, and probably that developer from Northwood Henderson. I've been trying to get a meeting with him for months. This could be huge for me. He saw my award not as a recognition of my work, but as a golden networking opportunity for himself. My father's reaction was perhaps the most telling. An award is great, Eleanor, he said, his voice practical and dismissive. But does it come with any money? Because you know the roof is going to need repairs soon. The message from all of them was loud and clear. My achievement was not valuable in itself. Its only worth was in how it could benefit them through social status, business connections, or financial gain. The initial joy I had felt curdled into a familiar heavy ache in my chest. I should have known better. This was the pattern, the rhythm of our family's dysfunction. My role was to provide, to support, to facilitate their lives. Their role was to take, to expect, to overlook. The award didn't change the pattern. It just amplified it. The dinner was no longer a celebration of my work. It was being repurposed into a stage for their ambitions and insecurities. The whispers of change I had hoped for were drowned out by the loud, clear voices of their self-interest. A small, cold part of me knew this night was not going to be the heartwarming family moment I had dreamed of. I just didn't realize it was going to be a public execution of the last shred of hope I had for our relationship. In the 2 weeks leading up to the Founders' Day dinner, my family's campaign to co-opt my moment of recognition escalated from subtly dismissive to overtly demanding. It was a masterclass in making me feel small, and every interaction was a fresh cut. The first incident came disguised as motherly concern. My mom called me one afternoon, her voice laced with that fake sugary sweetness she used when she was about to be critical. "Eleanor, honey, I was just thinking about the dinner. What are you planning on wearing?" I told her about the simple, elegant, dark blue dress I had bought at a consignment shop. It was modest professional, and I felt good in it. There was a long pause. "Consignment," she finally said the word, dripping with disdain. "Eleanor, all eyes will be on us. You're representing this family. You can't show up looking thrifty. Mark's girlfriend wears designer gowns to these things. You need to project success." She then sent me a link to a dress from a high-end boutique that cost more than my monthly rent. "I think this would be much more appropriate," she texted. When I told her I couldn't possibly afford it, she sighed dramatically. "Well, I guess you'll just have to find a way. Don't embarrass us." It wasn't about me feeling celebrated. It was about me not being a social liability to her. The second incident was a direct financial assault from my father. He called me a few days later, his tone jovial but with an undercurrent of steel. "Ellie girl, big night's coming up. Your mother and I were just at the mall and I saw the most beautiful suit. A real power suit. It would be perfect for the dinner. Make me look like the proud father of a real town hero." I knew what was coming. "That's great, Dad." He cleared his throat. "Thing is, it's a bit steep. I was thinking, since this whole night is for you, maybe you could help your old man out. Think of it as an investment in the family's image." He wanted me to pay for a $1,000 suit so he could look important at my award ceremony. When I hesitated, reminding him of the other loans that were still outstanding, his voice turned cold. "Don't be ungrateful, Eleanor. We raised you. We supported your little garden project when everyone thought it was a waste of time. The least you can do is make sure your father doesn't look shabby on your big night." The lie was breathtaking. They had never supported the project, they had tolerated it. But my ingrained guilt and desire to keep the peace won out. I transferred the money, feeling sick to my stomach as I watched my meager savings dwindle again. The third and most blatant incident came from Mark. He called me not to ask how I was feeling or if I was excited, but to issue a set of instructions. "Okay, Elle, listen up. I'm bringing Richard Henderson, the Northwood developer, to your little party. This is a massive deal for me. I need you to work him for me." I was confused. "Work him, Mark? I'm being honored." "I'll have to give a speech." He cut me off, impatient. Yeah, get to that. But during the reception, I need you to find him. Talk about your community engagement. Lay it on thick. Tell him how my developments always prioritize green space and community values. Sell the family brand. I've told him you're my secret weapon in community relations. He had reframed my life's work as a marketing tool for his soulless condo projects. He was not just ignoring my achievement, he was actively hijacking it for his own profit. Mark, that's not what my work is about, I said, my voice trembling. Don't be so naive, Elle, he scoffed. Everything is about something. Make this about helping your brother for once. I was drowning in their expectations, my own excitement completely extinguished and replaced with a heavy sense of dread. I tried to talk to my mother about it, hoping for a shred of understanding. I found her in the kitchen one afternoon when I dropped off some groceries I'd bought for them. Mom, I'm feeling really overwhelmed, I began carefully. It feels like the dinner isn't about the Evergreen project anymore. It feels like everyone just wants something from me. She didn't even look up from the magazine she was flipping through. Oh, Eleanor, don't be so sensitive. That's what family does. We support each other. You're getting the attention, and you can use that attention to help the rest of us. It's a win-win. She was framing their selfishness as familial synergy. My feelings were dismissed as being too sensitive, the classic tool of a manipulator. The final clarifying moment came from my best friend, Clara. She had dropped by my apartment to help me practice my speech. She found me sitting at my kitchen table, staring blankly at a piece of paper, my eyes red-rimmed. I poured out the whole story, the dress, the suit, Mark's business plan. She listened patiently, her expression growing stormier with each word. When I finished, she took both of my hands in hers. Ellie, she said, her voice firm but kind. Listen to me. These people are not celebrating you. They are vampires, and your award is a fresh new vein for them to tap into. This isn't support. It's a hostile takeover of your success. Hearing someone else say it, someone from the outside, validated everything I was feeling. It wasn't me being sensitive. It wasn't me being ungrateful. The situation was as toxic as I feared. Clara's words were a life raft in a sea of manipulation. They didn't solve the problem, but they gave me the strength to see it for what it truly was. I was heading into that dinner not with a family of supporters, but with a pack of wolves who saw me as their ticket to a free meal. The night of the Founders' Day dinner arrived on a wave of cold, crisp autumn air. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my small apartment, smoothing down the simple blue dress Clara had insisted on buying for me after the consignment incident. "This is your night," she had said, zipping me up. "You will look beautiful, and you will not let them dim your light." Her words were a fragile shield against the anxiety churning in my stomach. I drove to the historic town hall, the venue for the event, feeling a profound sense of loneliness. This should have been a triumphant evening, one shared with proud family members. Instead, it felt like I was walking into an ambush I had helped set. When I entered the grand ballroom, it was already buzzing with the town's most influential people. I saw my parents and Mark near the entrance, already holding court. My father was wearing his new $1,000 suit, looking preened and important. My mother was laughing a little too loudly with the wife of a bank president. Mark was deep in conversation with a man I recognized as Richard Henderson, his business target. They saw me walk in, and my mother waved me over with an impatient flick of her wrist as if summoning a waitress. "Eleanor, there you are," she said, her eyes scanning my dress with faint disapproval. "Go get us some champagne from the bar, will you, and see if you can find some of those little crab puffs for Mr. Henderson." There was no hug, no "you look wonderful," just an immediate task. Mark didn't even acknowledge me, beyond a curt nod, too engrossed in his deal-making. For the next hour, I was a ghost at my own party. I circulated accepting congratulations from community members, my colleagues, and the families I had helped through the pantry. Their genuine warmth was a stark contrast to my family's chilling indifference. Mayor Thompson greeted me with a warm handshake and a conspiratorial wink. "Big night, Eleanor." "Just you wait," he murmured, which gave me a small flicker of hope. But every time I looked over at my family, my heart sank. They were using my name, my achievement, as social currency, introducing themselves as the family of this year's honoree before launching into conversations about themselves. When the dinner bell chimed, we were all ushered toward the dining area. The head table was on a raised dais beautifully decorated with flowers and the town's official seal. This was it, the moment of recognition. As I approached, I looked for my name card, my steps slowing as I scanned the elegant calligraphy. I saw Frank Vance. I saw Susan Vance. I saw Mark Vance. I even saw a card for Richard Henderson. But my name, Eleanor Vance, was nowhere to be found. There wasn't even a chair for me. I stood there frozen as a cold wave of disbelief washed over me. It had to be a mistake, a simple oversight. I looked at my mother, who was already settling into her seat next to my father. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "there's no seat for me." She looked up, her expression not one of surprise but of mild annoyance. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Eleanor, don't make a fuss," she said in a hushed, sharp tone. "We assumed you'd be far too busy to sit down. You know, greeting people, making sure everything is running smoothly. We need you to be the hostess tonight." Then she turned to my father. "Frank, tell her." My father cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "Your mother is right, Ellie. You're the guest of honor, and that means you have responsibilities. It wouldn't look right for you to just be sitting here eating while there are people to thank." Then Mark leaned over, a smug smirk playing on his lips. "Besides, Elle, we needed the seat for Mr. Henderson. This is business. You understand." And in that moment, something inside me shattered. It wasn't just a missing chair. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being overlooked, of being used, of being told my purpose was to serve their needs. They hadn't forgotten my seat. They had deliberately removed it. They had looked at a dinner in my honor and decided my most valuable role was that of unpaid staff. They didn't see a daughter or a sister to be celebrated. They saw a tool to be utilized. The hostess, the waitress. The invisible engine that made their evening run smoothly. The humiliation was so profound, so public, it was breathtaking. I could feel the eyes of nearby tables on me, the pitying glances, the awkward silence. The joy, the pride, the last vestiges of hope, they all evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a declaration. It was them telling me in front of the entire town exactly where I stood. I was not one of them. I did not belong at their table. I took a step back from the dais, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The shield Clara had given me had been obliterated. My light wasn't just dimmed. They were trying to snuff it out completely. I could feel tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give them the satisfaction of my breakdown. A calm, chilling resolve settled over me. They thought they had put me in my place in the shadows on the sidelines. They were about to find out they had just pushed me directly into the spotlight. As I stood there adrift in a sea of elegantly set tables, the noise of the ballroom fading into a dull roar in my ears, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. I turned to see Mayor Thompson standing beside me, his kind, weathered face etched with a look of profound understanding. He had seen the whole thing. The missing chair, my mother's dismissive wave, the smug look on my brother's face. He didn't say a word about it. Instead, he leaned in and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Eleanor, just breathe. The night is young, and the best part is yet to come. Trust me." His words were an anchor, and they reminded me of a secret I had been holding for 3 weeks, a secret that was my true reason for enduring this night. This wasn't just about the Spirit of Maple Creek Award. There was something much bigger at play. My mind flashed back to a meeting in his office a month prior. He had summoned me under the guise of discussing a grant application for the Evergreen Project. We sat in his stately office, surrounded by portraits of previous mayors and shelves of leather-bound books. After some pleasantries, he had leaned forward, his expression serious. "Eleanor," he'd begun, "I've been watching your work for years. What you've built with the Evergreen Project is more than just a garden. It's the heart of this community. but I've also seen how you operate. You do the work and others seem to take the credit." He paused, looking at me intently. "I've seen it at town meetings, at fundraisers. Your family." He trailed off, too diplomatic to finish the sentence. I must have looked surprised because he smiled gently. "A mayor sees a lot, Eleanor. I see who shows up when the cameras are off. I see who does the heavy lifting. And I see who swoops in to take the bow." He then told me the real reason for our meeting. He had on his own initiative nominated me for the Heartwood Fellowship, a prestigious, highly competitive national award for emerging community leaders. It was an award that came with mentorship from national-level nonprofit executives and, most significantly, a $250,000 grant to expand the winner's project. "I nominated you 6 months ago," he explained. "The selection process is rigorous. They do background checks, interviews, even anonymous site visits. And 3 weeks ago, I received a confidential letter." He slid a piece of paper across his polished desk. "You are one of 3 finalists in the entire country, Eleanor. The final announcement will be made in a month, but they allow nominators to make a local pre-announcement to honor the finalists. I was planning to make that announcement at the Founders' Day dinner. I had been stunned into silence. A $250,000 grant, a national fellowship. It was beyond anything I had ever dreamed of. It was the kind of funding that could transform the Evergreen Project from a local success story into a regional model for community sustainability. It meant a greenhouse for year-round, growing a refrigerated van for deliveries, and paid living wage positions for my core team of volunteers. It meant security. It meant impact. "Why keep it a secret?" I had asked, my voice hoarse. "Because I wanted it to be a surprise," he said. "But also, frankly, because I didn't want your family to have time to figure out how to spend the money before you even had it." His perception of my situation was so accurate it was startling. We then devised a quiet plan. The local award would be the cover story. We would let my family believe that was the extent of the honor. The National Fellowship announcement would be the true centerpiece of his speech. Standing there in the ballroom, humiliated and chairless, I suddenly understood the full weight of the mayor's strategy. He hadn't just given me an opportunity. He had given me a weapon. My secret wasn't just a grant. It was irrefutable public validation from a source my family could not dismiss or co-opt. Their power over me was rooted in their ability to define my worth. They defined my work as a hobby, my contributions as loans, my very presence as functional rather than familial. But the mayor, and by extension the National Heartwood Foundation, were about to offer a very different definition. I looked back at the head table. My parents were laughing with the town council president. Mark was leaning in conspiratorially with Mr. Henderson. They were so secure in their roles, so confident in their power, so utterly oblivious to the tidal wave that was about to crash down on their perfectly arranged evening. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully relegated me to the background. My plan was simple: survive. Survive the next hour of feigned smiles and public servitude. Endure their casual cruelty, and wait for the mayor's speech. Every condescending glance, every dismissive comment, every time my mother gestured for me to refill a water glass, it all became fuel. I wasn't just waiting for recognition anymore. I was waiting for vindication. My Vur Kibi Mert wasn't just the money. It was the truth, and it was about to be delivered from the highest podium in the room. I had a front row seat to my own liberation. I just didn't have a chair. The hour of dinner service was one of the longest of my life. I moved through the ballroom on autopilot, a fixed, pleasant smile on my face that felt like a mask. I did as my mother had instructed, playing the role of the gracious hostess. I refilled wine glasses, pointed guests toward the restrooms, and made small talk, all while my family sat elevated on the dais, basking in a spotlight they hadn't earned. Each time I passed the head table, I was met with complete indifference. They didn't see me, the person. They saw only my function. My mother once caught my eye and mouthed water, pointing to her empty glass before turning back to her conversation. The humiliation was a constant, sharp sting. Finally, after the dessert plates were cleared, the lights dimmed. The town council president stepped up to the podium to begin the awards ceremony. My heart began to pound a frantic drum against my ribs. He gave a lengthy speech about the town's history, and then it was time. And now he boomed, "It is my distinct honor to introduce a man who needs no introduction, our esteemed mayor, the Honorable Robert Thompson, to present this year's Spirit of Maple Creek Award." A polite applause filled the room as Mayor Thompson walked to the podium. He adjusted the microphone, his calm, commanding presence silencing the remaining chatter. He began his speech by thanking everyone for coming. He spoke of community of service and of the quiet heroes who are the true backbone of a town like Maple Creek. "We are here tonight to celebrate one such hero," he said, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me, standing near the side wall. "We're here to honor Eleanor Vance." A warm round of applause erupted, and I felt a blush creep up my neck. My parents and Mark clapped along, smiling proudly as if they were the architects of my success. The mayor continued, "For 5 years, Eleanor has poured her heart and soul into the Evergreen Project. She took a forgotten piece of land and turned it into a beacon of hope. She has fed the hungry, educated our children, and built a community where there was once only neglect. She has done this not for praise, not for profit, but because she believes in the power of people to help one another." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then his tone shifted. It became sharper, more pointed. He looked directly at the head table. "A leader of Eleanor's caliber inspires deep loyalty and pride. And I can see how proud her family is tonight," he said, gesturing toward them. "So proud, in fact, that they have saved her a seat of honor right here at the head table so that the whole town can see them celebrate her." He trailed off, feigning confusion as he scanned the table. "Oh, wait a moment." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. The silence in the ballroom became heavy, uncomfortable. My parents froze their smiles, faltering. Mark's face went rigid. "It seems there's been an oversight," the mayor said, his voice ringing with theatrical disappointment. "There doesn't appear to be a seat for our guest of honor. You could have heard a pin drop." The spotlight was no longer on the mayor. It was a laser beam focused on the 5 empty inches of table where my chair should have been. The faces of my parents and brothers cycled through a rapid series of emotions, confusion, then irritation, then the dawning, horrified realization of how this looked. Their public performance of proud family had just been brutally exposed as a sham. The mayor let the silence stretch for another agonizing second before he smiled a broad, brilliant smile. "No matter," he declared, his voice booming with authority. "Because a leader like Eleanor Vance doesn't need a seat saved for her. She makes her own table." And then he did something no one expected. He stepped away from the podium, walked down the steps of the dais, and strode over to a nearby empty guest table. He picked up a chair, turned, and walked back to the head table. In front of the entire silent ballroom, he placed the chair firmly at the head of the table, right next to his own seat, in a position of even greater prominence than where my family. Saturday, he turned to me, his arm extended. "Eleanor," he said, his voice clear and resonant, "please, join us. Your seat is waiting." Numbly, I walked toward him. It felt like moving through water. As I passed my family, I didn't look at them, but I could feel their scorching glares. I sat down in the chair he had brought for me. The ballroom erupted in spontaneous, thunderous applause, far louder and more heartfelt than before. It wasn't just for my award anymore. It was for this stunning act of public vindication. The mayor returned to the podium, letting the applause die down. "Now," he said, "while the Spirit of Maple Creek Award is a great honor, it's my privilege tonight to announce that it is not the only recognition Eleanor will be receiving." He looked directly at me. "Because of her extraordinary leadership and vision, I secretly nominated Eleanor for the National Heartwood Fellowship for Community Leaders. Tonight I am thrilled to announce that out of hundreds of nominees from across the country, Eleanor has been named one of the 3 national finalists." Gasps rippled through the room. My family's faces were a picture of utter slack-jawed disbelief. This fellowship, the mayor's voice boomed, comes with a grant of $250,000 to expand the Evergreen project. The room exploded. People were on their feet, cheering, clapping, turning to congratulate me. The sound was deafening. Through it all, I looked at my family. My father's face was ashen. My mother looked like she might be sick, and Mark was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of fury, shock, and something that looked terrifyingly like raw envy. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted in the space of 5 minutes. They had tried to make me invisible, and the mayor had made me the most important person in the room. They had defined me by my utility, and he had defined me by my value. They had taken my chair, and he had given me a throne. The showdown was over, and I hadn't had to say a single word. The rest of the evening was a surreal blur. As soon as the ceremony concluded, I was engulfed by a wave of well-wishers. People who had only known me as the quiet girl who runs the garden now saw me as a community leader on a national stage. They shook my hand, they hugged me, they showered me with genuine congratulations. I felt seen in a way I never had before. From across the room, I could see my family now isolated on their dais-turned island. The influential people they had been so eager to impress were now all crowded around me. Mr. Henderson, Mark's coveted client, made a point of coming over to shake my hand. "Incredible work, young lady," he said, his eyes twinkling. "My wife is on the board of a similar nonprofit. I'd love to hear more about your expansion plans." He didn't even glance in Mark's direction. My family finally made their approach, a clumsy, awkward phalanx moving through the crowd. My mother reached me first, her face a mess of forced smiles and panic. "Eleanor, darling, a national fellowship. Why didn't you tell us? We are just bursting with pride." Her attempt to reclaim the narrative was so transparent it was almost comical. "There wasn't much to tell," I replied, my voice cool and even. My father was next, clapping me awkwardly on the shoulder. "Well, Ellie girl, you really pulled a rabbit out of your hat. $250, 000, that's wonderful. We'll have to have a talk about how to best invest that for the project, of course." The assumption that he would have any say in the matter was galling but predictable. Mark just stood behind them, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He wouldn't look me in the eye. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by a sullen, wounded anger. He knew in that moment that he had lost. I extricated myself as quickly as I could. "It's been a long night," I said to them, my tone polite but distant. "We can talk later." I didn't wait for a reply. I said my goodbyes to the mayor and my friends and walked out of the ballroom alone, leaving my family to navigate the social fallout of their own making. I didn't look back. Driving home, the silence in my car was a balm. The weight of their expectations, a burden I had carried for 32 years, had finally been lifted. I felt light, free, and utterly exhausted. The next morning, the dam of their denial broke. My phone was bombarded with a flurry of texts and missed calls. My mother's texts were pleading, "Eleanor, please call me. We need to celebrate properly as a family." My father's were practical and demanding, "I've left you 2 voicemails. We need to discuss the financial structure of this grant." Mark's was a single venomous line, "You think you're so much better than us now, don't you?" I ignored them all. I turned my phone on silent and spent the day at the garden, my hands in the soil, feeling grounded and centered for the first time in weeks. My first act of independence came that Monday. For years, I had dreamed of having a dedicated workshop space for the Evergreen project, a place for classes and tool storage, but it had always been a financial impossibility. Now, with the promise of the grant, things were different. I used the last of my personal savings, the money that hadn't been siphoned off for suits and cruises, to put a security deposit on a small sunlit storefront just a block from the garden. It was a risk, as the grant money hadn't arrived yet, but it was a declaration. I was no longer waiting for permission. I was building my own future. As the weeks went by and my phone calls went unanswered, my family's panic grew. They realized their primary source of no questions asked financial support was gone. Their social standing had taken a public hit. People in town were talking. The story of the missing chair had become a piece of local legend, a cautionary tale about taking goodness for granted. They had relied on me for so much more than money. They had relied on my silence, my compliance, my willingness to be small so they could feel big. Now that foundation was gone and their carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. For me, however, it wasn't a crumbling. It was the dawn. 1 year to the day after the Founders' Day dinner, I stood on the newly constructed cedar deck of the Evergreen Project's Education Center. The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the raised garden beds where a group of elementary school children were engaged in a boisterous debate over the proper way to harvest a carrot. Their laughter, bright and uninhibited, was the new soundtrack of my life. The air, rich with the scent of damp earth, blooming marigolds, and possibility, felt cleaner and sweeter than I had ever known it to be. This place, this vibrant heart of the community, was the tangible proof that my life hadn't just continued after that fateful night. It had truly begun. The Heartwood Fellowship grant had been more than just a financial windfall. It was a force of nature that had allowed a seedling of an idea to grow into a mighty oak. The small sunlit storefront I had once rented on a prayer, and the last of my savings, was now the hub of a multifaceted operation that had more than doubled in size and impact. We had built the state-of-the-art greenhouse, its glass panels gleaming in the sun, which provided a year-round supply of fresh greens and vegetables. The food pantry, once reliant on unpredictable donations, was now consistently stocked, a reliable source of nutrition for over 200 families in Maple Creek. Our refrigerated van, affectionately nicknamed the Green Bean, had become a familiar and welcome sight throughout town. It didn't just supply the local shelters. It was the vessel for our new Evergreen Eats on Wheels program. 3 days a week, Maria, my new program director, would drive it to the homes of elderly and disabled residents, delivering not just fresh produce, but a friendly face and a moment of connection. I'd never forget Mrs. Gable, an 8-year-old widow, telling me with tears in her eyes that our visits were the only time she saw another person all week. That was the kind of impact money couldn't measure. The grant had allowed me to hire my 2 most dedicated volunteers, Maria and Ben, as full-time salaried employees with comprehensive health benefits, a fact that brought me an immense sense of pride. They were no longer just volunteers. They were my partners, my colleagues, my friends. We had also launched a high school internship program and a cooking on a budget class every Thursday night taught by a retired chef who volunteered his time. The project was no longer just my passion. It was a sustainable, thriving, and beloved town institution. My own life had undergone a parallel, equally dramatic transformation. The fellowship provided personal financial planning, a concept that had once seemed as foreign to me as astrophysics. A kind, patient advisor had helped me untangle my finances, set up a retirement fund, and create a real workable budget. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't just surviving. I was building a secure future. 6 months ago, I had signed the papers on a small 2-bedroom cottage on a quiet, tree-lined street. The down payment came entirely from my own salary, and savings, a fact that filled me with a quiet, unshakable sense of accomplishment. The house was modest, but it was mine. It had a porch, swing, a fireplace, and a small yard that was now the personal domain of Gus, a ridiculously cheerful golden retriever I'd adopted from a local shelter. He was a warm, living, breathing embodiment of unconditional love, a concept I was slowly learning to embrace. My home was no longer a place to simply sleep and store my patched-up belongings. It was a sanctuary, a place filled with light plants, books, and a profound sense of peace. The justice for my family when it came was not the result of some vengeful, orchestrated plot on my part. I had simply stepped out of the way and allowed the natural consequences of their own choices to unfold. Without my role as the family's emergency fund and emotional shock absorber, their carefully constructed world proved to be remarkably fragile. My parents, who had built their identities around their large house and their social standing in Maple Creek, found that their lifestyle was unsustainable without my constant financial infusions. The roof did in fact need the expensive repairs my father had predicted. But this time, there was no Ellie girl to call, no guilt-ridden daughter to manipulate into emptying her savings account. They were forced to take out a reverse mortgage, a financial maneuver that for my prideful father was the ultimate admission of failure. The weight of the house became a burden rather than a status symbol. They sold it a few months ago and downsized to a generic two-bedroom condo in a sprawling retirement community an hour away. Their departure from Maple Creek was quiet and unceremonious. The social circle they had so carefully cultivated, the one that had witnessed their public humiliation, had simply and quietly drifted away. They were no longer the proud parents of the town hero. They were just the couple who had callously refused their own daughter a seat at the table. Mark's decline was a slower, more insidious burn. Richard Henderson, the developer he had been so desperate to impress, had been a man of quiet integrity. He had been appalled by Mark's blatant opportunism and the family's treatment of me that night. He not only declined to do business with my brother, but word of the incident spread quickly through the tight-knit local development community. Mark's reputation was tarnished. He was no longer seen as a sharp, ambitious developer, but as a classless opportunist who couldn't be trusted. Deals fell through. Potential partners backed away. His business, built on a foundation of charisma and connections rather than substance, began to stagnate. The flashy condo and expensive German car, once his proudest possessions, became millstones of debt. I saw the for sale sign go up on his condo building one afternoon while driving back from a nursery. A few weeks later, I ran into him at the grocery store. It was the first time we'd seen each other in nearly a year. He looked thinner, his expensive suit replaced by a wrinkled polo shirt. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a haunted, defensive energy. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Elle," he mumbled, pushing his cart past me. "Heard you're doing well." It wasn't a question or congratulations. It was a bitter statement of fact. That was the extent of our conversation. My relationship with all of them was now governed by a set of firm, unshakable boundaries that I had painstakingly erected. I had not excommunicated them from my life, but the terms of engagement were now dictated by me. I drove out to visit my parents in their new condo on the first Sunday of every month. The visits were meticulously structured. I would bring them a box of fresh vegetables from the garden. I would listen politely to my mother's complaints about the condo association rules and my father's laments about the stock market. I would not discuss my finances. I would not entertain any revisionist history of the past. And I would leave after exactly 1 hour. During my third visit, my father, with his old practiced casualness, tried to test the new reality. "Ellie girl," he said, walking me to the door. "Things are a little tight this month. We were thinking just a small loan, a few hundred, to tide us over." I stopped and turned to face him. I didn't feel anger or resentment, just a calm, sad certainty. I looked him directly in the eye and said clearly and without malice, "No, Dad. I'm sorry, but that's not something I do anymore." I watched a flicker of the old anger cross his face, followed by a look of resigned defeat. He knew the game was over. He simply nodded and said, "All right then." He never asked again. Mark had tried to bridge the chasm with a clumsy, self-serving text message a few months ago. "Hey, Elle, been doing a lot of thinking. I'm sorry for how things went down. It's been really tough for me lately, and I guess I wasn't at my best." It was a classic non-apology designed to elicit sympathy rather than offer genuine remorse. The old me would have replied instantly, reassuring him, offering to help. The new me simply read the message, understood it for the manipulation it was, and replied hours later with a single neutral sentence, "I hope things get better for you." I was no longer a participant in his drama, no longer responsible for his feelings or his failures. The most profound change I realized was not external but internal. I had spent my entire life believing my worth was conditional, something to be earned through perpetual service and self-sacrifice. The brutal public humiliation of that night had been a painful but necessary surgery, excising the toxic belief that I had to make myself small to be loved. My friend and mentor, Mayor Thompson, had said something to me once that had resonated deep in my soul. Eleanor, he'd said over coffee one morning, they didn't value you because they couldn't see you. They could only ever see their own reflection in the mirror of your needs. He was right. I had finally stopped being their mirror and had started becoming a person. The real justice wasn't seeing them fail. It was watching myself succeed on my own terms. It was in the grateful smiles of the people we helped, in the joyful bark of my dog, as I walked through my own front door in the quiet, profound peace of my own home. It was the deep, unshakable understanding that I had not just built a community garden, I had finally painstakingly cultivated a life where I was at long last the guest of honor at my own table. I had found my place not because someone had saved me a seat, but because I had built the entire table myself. As I look back on the tumultuous journey that brought me to this peaceful place in my life, my thoughts often return to that one single object, the empty chair. For so long, I saw it only as a symbol of my family's profound disrespect, a stark and public monument to a lifetime of being made to feel insignificant. It was the physical manifestation of every time my achievements were minimized, every time my needs were dismissed, every time I was treated as a utility rather than a daughter or a sister. And it was without a doubt all of those things. The caustic humiliation of that moment was real, and the scar it left was deep. But now, with the clarity that only time and healing can provide, I see that empty chair as something more. In the strange and often paradoxical way life works, that empty chair was the greatest gift my family ever gave me. It was the brutal, necessary catalyst that finally forced me to stop politely asking for a place at a table where I was never truly welcome. It was the act of erasure so profound that it inspired me to pick up a hammer and build a bigger, better, and more beautiful table of my own. The most powerful lesson I learned wasn't about the intricacies of family dynamics, the sting of betrayal, or even the sweet taste of public vindication. The true lesson was about the fundamental nature of value. For 32 years, I had operated under the false assumption that my worth was something external, something to be earned and validated by the people around me, especially my family. I believed on a subconscious level that if I was helpful enough, generous enough, quiet enough, and compliant enough, I would eventually be granted the love and respect I craved. My life was a constant, exhausting audition for a role they had never intended to cast. That night, they didn't just remove my chair. They ripped up my script and threw it in my face. They showed me with chilling clarity that in their eyes, my value was entirely conditional. It was contingent upon my ability to fund their vacations, advance my brother's career, and play the role of the smiling, invisible hostess at my own celebration. The moment I ceased to be useful in the way they demanded, I ceased to exist. And that realization, as painful as it was, set me free. It severed the puppet strings of obligation and approval that I had allowed to control me for my entire life. I finally understood that I had been a ghost in my own family, a function rather than a person. I was the emergency contact, the soft place to land, the reliable bank account. But I was not Eleanor. My work wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a resource to be leveraged. My success wasn't a cause for celebration. It was an opportunity to be exploited. And the love I thought I was earning through self-sacrifice was never love at all. It was just their deep-seated entitlement masquerading as familial affection. This painful clarity cleared the way for me to recognize and truly appreciate the real unconditional love that had been present in my life all along. It was in the fierce loyalty of my friend Clara, who saw my worth even when I couldn't, and who refused to let me accept less than I deserved. It was in the quiet, strategic mentorship of Mayor Thompson, a man who used his power not to maintain the status quo, but to lift up someone he saw doing good in the world. It was in the dedication of my colleagues Maria and Ben, who had worked alongside me for years out of pure passion and belief in our shared mission. It was in the grateful smiles of the families we served at the food pantry, people who saw me not as a means to an end, but as a source of help and hope. I learned that true family isn't always about the blood you share. It's about the people who show up not just for the parties, but for the quiet, difficult moments. It's about the people who see you for exactly who you are and celebrate you not in spite of your passions, but because of them. It's about the people who would not only save you a seat, but would gladly march across a crowded room and bring you a chair if one was missing. The anger which once burned like a wildfire in my chest has long since settled into the warm embers of wisdom. Do I forgive them? That's a complicated question. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a grand single event. It's a quiet, personal process. It isn't about condoning their actions or erasing the past. It's not about letting them off the hook or pretending the hurt never happened. For me, forgiveness was about accepting that they are who they are, limited by their own insecurities and their own shallow definitions of success. It was about releasing my own heart from the prison of their judgment. I forgive them not for their sake, but for mine. It was a conscious decision to stop allowing their toxicity to take up any more space in my life. I let go of the bitterness because I needed my hands free to build something better. And maybe that's why you're listening to my story today. Maybe you felt that same sting of being overlooked, that same ache of being undervalued by the very people who are supposed to be your biggest champions. I want to speak directly to the person who feels like they're perpetually standing on the sidelines of their own life, waiting for an invitation that never comes. I want to talk to the person who is always the designated driver, the designated babysitter, the designated problem solver, but never the designated guest of honor. I want to speak to the person whose chair has been metaphorically or literally given away to someone deemed more important. I see you. I understand that quiet heartbreak. And I am here to tell you that you do not have to wait for anyone's permission to claim your space in the world. Your work is not to convince them of your worth. Your work is not to contort yourself into a shape they find more acceptable or useful. Your work is to build your own table. Maybe your table is a business you start from scratch. Maybe it's a community project you pour your heart into. Maybe it's a small circle of friends who love you fiercely and unconditionally. Maybe it's a quiet, peaceful home you create for yourself, a sanctuary from the noise of the world's expectations. Or maybe it's simply a life lived on your own terms, governed by your own values of integrity, kindness, and self-respect. It doesn't matter how big or small your table island, what matters is that it is yours. What matters is that at this table you are not the hostess, the servant, or the afterthought. At this table you are the guest of honor every single day. It's a long and often lonely process, this work of building. It requires a level of courage you might not think you possess. It means disappointing people. It means setting boundaries that feel uncomfortable at first. It means grieving the family you wished you had so you can fully embrace the life that is waiting for you. But I promise you, it is worth it. The peace that comes from living an authentic life is a reward far greater than the fleeting approval of those who will never truly see you. Have you ever had a moment in your life, big or small, where you had to stop waiting for a seat at someone else's table and decided to build your own? What did that moment look like for you? And what did you build? I would be so honored to hear your stories of strength, resilience, and self-discovery in the comments below. Your journey could be the inspiration someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you and the journey we've taken together, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel to hear more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding your own power. And please share this with someone who might need a reminder that their worth is not up for debate and that they deserve a prominent seat at the table of life. Thank you for listening. My story began with an empty chair, a symbol of what I lacked. But it ends with a full table, a full garden, and a full heart. A life built not on the ashes of what was, but on the fertile ground of what could be. May you always find the courage to do the same.